I'll let you.
I'll restart it.
Yeah. No, I'll let you make sure I did it first.
Okay.
I won't go on any further in there because
There's coffee there, but they gave me milk
Oh, dear.
and they gave me sugar
Oh, they gave
and
you-
a stirrer, so you
Oh,
can.
thank you.
all of a sudden I heard it. I looked up and there's this freshman girl, and I really, after the war, I was, as the expression goes, the sadder but wiser girl for me. And she's there, and somebody had knocked her tray, and in those days milk came in little bottles, not cartons. And her bottle of milk literally, honestly, landed right in my bread pudding, spattering it all over. Well, she and her girlfriend were looking for, had seen 2 seats further down, and the girlfriend didn't see this, but she saw those 2 seats were full, and the 2 seats between my roommate and me were empty. So she sat down there, and Joanne ended up sitting next to me, and she made a negative comment about the food, and as she says, I snarled at her because I'd only been back from probably less than 6 months from World War, from being overseas, about how the people over there were, they were literally fishing in our garbage trays for any food. And but one thing led to another.
There you are.
Yeah.
How many years later?
50. This will be 53 in June.
Let me make sure this is up. Is that on? There. Thanks.
Anyway,
Tell me about the training you got.
well, the training was in Camp Crowder, and because Crowder was very full and jammed, our outfit was trained in the evening. So we would go to class around, well, after supper until about 1 or 2 in the morning. And in our area of the Camp Crowder had the PA systems off so that we could sleep through. But because of that, we had almost no formations. We had none of that red tape that went on. Everything was so disorganized where we were, other than the classes. And we learned to type, we learned procedures, we learned, everything that, all the red tape that the Army expects you to put on messages, to assign them. And but the main thing was to get your typing speed up to about 40 words or more per minute, which we did. And we were in training there, and we had a magnificent captain. We were supposed to go on exercises, to keep us physically active. So on weekends, we didn't have the night classes. So every now and then on a weekend, I'm sorry, but every now and then, I think it only happened twice, we were taken out to do a hike. Well, in the Army, you did whatever you did for 15 minutes, and you had a 10-minute break, usually called a cigarette break. Everybody seemed to smoke. So we got out, hiked for 15 minutes out, and he hiked us into a field. And he says, okay, time for break, 15 minutes. 4 hours later, okay, break is up. And he took us back, and the cooks had prepared donuts and coffee. He was a great captain. He could get away with it because here it was at night. Nobody was going to tell on him.
Yeah.
And,
How long was the school?
Hmm?
How long was the school?
Well, I got there in April, I guess, and by July we had done all the training we were going to do, and we started getting ready, and I couldn't give you a clear picture of this. We did have some activities, I don't know what, but I mean, mostly it was like getting ready to ship overseas. And I was very fortunate, I had applied for OCS, and because you like to look good, so I'll tell you this one too. I actually qualified when I discovered my outfit was due to go overseas, so I canceled it. So I wasn't going to stay in this country when they were going over. And in probably towards the end of September, we moved out of Crowder and ended up at Camp Kilmer, where we stayed there for 2 weeks, and then finally was shipped out on an old Liberty ship, 300 guys. We always swore they left off one tank and put all 300 of us in there. go over there, and a lot of the guys were seasick, so this place was a little bit right. Before we got done, we had 2 meals a day, and anyway, the ship died on the way over. About a day out of England, the engines went, and they were able to fix it. But the convoy would be a sitting duck if it stopped, so the convoy went on, and all of a sudden you realized what a sitting duck you were. We sat out there, and the British sent out one of these flying boats. Which we were hit by a torpedo. The only thing they could do was make our wife
Report your location.
Yeah. So anyway, of course, we got to Cardiff, and then went up to.
Now you say convoy. Were the other ships with troop ships, or were they?
Oh, everything.
Protection?
Everything. There were tankers. There were obvious freighters.
How long a trip?
9 days. Same thing as coming back. It was 9 days coming back. Though that was because we were in a storm the whole time we were back, but which is not possible because all storms go from west to east. But we were in a storm all the way back after the war. What was the? So as I say, it was 9 days of. There wasn't in the daytime. We could at nighttime nobody was allowed on the deck because somebody might light a match or something, and so we were all in the holes. But in the daytime we could be on the deck. And where are you going to sit? Well, you could. If you were lucky, with the number of guys we had, we're all crammed in a small place, you could get a place at the rail, at least for one elbow. The hatch covers were loaded. There was one hatch cover that was filled almost immediately. And we did have a guy, he was a yo-yo artist. And he had a yo-yo with a great long string, and to him, over the side, had the yo-yo come between the waves. Can you imagine that length he had? He was really great. So we... that was that going over there. It was exciting that you knew what you were heading for. We knew we were due for a Supreme Headquarters, but we really didn't know what that meant. And we got to, at Southampton, we were held up for a while because of some bombing raids. We saw some way high in the sky, some dogfights, but that was it. And then finally we headed over to France. Well, during the time we were there, I say we were there about 3 days, I remember reading a book about a soldier in World War I. You look around, see what's up. And we had miserable quarters. The WACs, we had 40 WACs on board. They were on one deck. We were on the next deck up. And there were MPs at each place so that they couldn't get up to us. We couldn't get down to them at night. Everything mixed in the daytime. But I looked around, and to this day don't know what it was, but I pulled me in a closet here and a closet there. I opened a door, and it was filled with cloth of some sort. I never went back in the daytime. I didn't want anybody to know this. There was only room for me. And I could sleep on this practically like a mattress. It was nice and warm, so I had a good trip over. Well, we got over, and I always enjoy this because we landed. This is a long time after D-Day. We landed on the beach in Le Havre on an honest-to-God landing craft infantry, with the thing comes down and the troops charge out. Well, we surged out right after the troops who were in front of us, who were 40 WACs. The 40 WACs landed on the beach, and then we came up. Loaded us on the trucks, and we went out to a trench and camp. And again, I was lucky. The places we had to sleep were very small tents, simply on the ground. There had been hay down there, but by now it was all muddy. And you just laid down and let your hat on because it was cold. And once you laid down, you better figure that you were on the right position, because you'd be, and I mean this, unable to turn, because there are people's boots in your back. You were just jammed. So about 4 o'clock in the morning, I just had enough of this. I couldn't take it. So I managed to get myself up and out of the tent and ran into the first sergeant. What the hell are you doing? He says, I'm looking for guys for KP. I said, put me on. So I went into KP, and they had a bunch of nice guys that were cooks. And they said, look, there's nothing for you to do, so why don't you sit here and have, I think we had Spam sandwiches and coffee until we started serving. And then came the job that we're going to do. We're going to do the cleaning up that we realized we served, and then we clean up. And just as we're ready to start cleaning up, the first sergeant came out, okay, everybody out. Look, what are we going to do? You're taking our guys. Hey, we're shipping out. So they loaded us into trucks, and we went by truck to Versailles. It was a rainy day, so that the guys, not stormy rainy, just, one of those misty kind of things. And the guys who were, the trucks were covered. The guys who were close to the opening at the back that had the best view, literally you could tell where they sat, because if they sat facing on one side, this was all muddy, if they're on the other. But on the way up, the French are a little bit more nonchalant about going to the bathroom. But of course, we were typical Americans, and all of a sudden there was a yell, hey, look at the guy, he's pissing against the wall. Everybody was in the truck, my God, we never had anything like that. We got to Versailles, and were put up in the old, and they were pretty good. We were in barracks. They did have barracks, but this was where the rulers, the kings of France, had their horses kept, and we ate in the old stables. They were clean. There was no problem there. And we got to our barracks. They said, here's your barracks. We go in, and there's a wooden floor. There's walls. There's windows. That's all. No beds. No nothing. Our duffel bags are there. Well, in the Army, you have guys from all levels and strata and parts of life. So a couple of, I don't know how many more they may have been, but a couple of them, they probably looked at life a little differently than I did. So they probed around, and they found that there was another set of barracks. They happened to be British, so that didn't make any difference. They just, with beds in them, mattresses, and blankets. Everything else had been taken out, and so there were some guards at this place, British guards, and so we figured, these guys did, we could get hold of those bunks and the mattresses and the blankets if we could get these guards tied up. So they got two of the youngest guys, that didn't have any beard or anything at all. What they do, they went over to the British guards and, gee, where have you been in the Army? What did you see? This sort of thing. And the guards fell for it. Meanwhile, one of our troops managed to open a window back there, and we got all of the beds out of there except the two that you could see at the door, and all the mattresses and all the blankets. Of course, there's no identification, and had them in our barracks, and this is what was here. That was how we got our stuff. I don't know how those guys, when they got back, got their beds. And then we did a little bit of training there to methods in there, and eventually I ended up in, they were going to set up Supreme Headquarters forward. Well, once the military starts something, it's almost impossible to stop it. And how the heck do you open the damn thing? The bulge had occurred. So thank you. We were going to open up the forward, and so those of us who had been, I was lucky enough to be one of the ones picked. We were sent up to what the French call ranks, and we call reams, and there we got up there, and the bulge had occurred. So they didn't dare set up. We were close enough to the bulge, so I got points, as they call it, for being in a combat zone. The line went through there, and this later on, when it came to time to get out, they gave me 4 more points, I think, something like that. And so we're stationed up there, and we can't open forward because it's too dangerous. We're liable to be overrun. By the way, we were unable, anybody with top secret clearance in SHAFE was unable to volunteer or to be at all in combat. The argument, because we had some guys who asked, and the first sergeant checked. And the thing was, the U.S. Army has a policy not to put its ordinary soldiers into a situation where they must commit suicide rather than be captured. So, okay, we couldn't. So we sat there, and I played so much bridge. I literally played bridge, and I mean this, 14 to 15 hours a day, to the point that today I still can't do anything but playing bridge. But anyway, we did, and we just had nothing to do except eat and play bridge. Interesting, one time, of course there's always a possibility something. one time we were called out, and all of us jammed into a room not too much bigger than this. Christ, you could have me breathe. MPs at the door, and we went, holy mackerel, you know, somebody is. Come to find out, we were then given a lecture on occasionally you'll see an airplane that leaves a trail behind it up there. There's no way we can hide this, but these are special planes. Just ignore it. Act as if it was normal when you're out in the town. These were the jets, the first jets leaving a contrail. And but eventually we did open up Supreme headquarters there, the advanced headquarters. Then it became the main headquarters. And for about a week before the Germans surrendered, I happened to be on the midnight. We had shifts, you know, 3 all the way around. So I would happen to be at that time of the midnight to 8 o'clock in the morning shift. And you got there a little bit early because you had a bite to eat. Yeah, they served a meal at about 11:30. We got a chance to eat, and we went in the mess hall there. Went into work, and about 11 o'clock at every night for about a week, the Swiss, with the Swiss flag, their embassy cars, you know, I don't know what they use, but the equivalent of our limousines would come in, and out would get German officers in full regalia. And they were setting up, making the decisions as to how the surrender would go. The night of the surrender, we all knew it was. You couldn't keep something like that secret. And we had about 12 guys in the editing section on each shift. And I literally was the only one, I won't say sober, but sober enough to stand. The rest of them couldn't even stand. All the way through, there were guys on the ground, drunk, dead out completely. This was, the Germans were surrendering. And so the next morning, I had one of the great epiphanies of my life. 8 o'clock, I went back to the barracks, and I had this guy I told you about. He and I were with the MOS numbers of the base of infantry. So he was there. He had a different type of job, maintenance of equipment. And I woke him up, so he wasn't on shift. And he looked up in the bed, and he said, I said, it's over. The Germans have surrendered. And he looked up, he said, you're going home? And of course, you realize the Japs hadn't surrendered. So no. So he said, all of them were over and went to sleep. Well, I went outside. And probably around 10 o'clock, I'm literally just wandering around Reims. And about 10 o'clock, I don't know how they did it. I mean, how it happened. But literally, out of the shops, out of the buildings, people poured out, butchers in bloody aprons, clerks in the schmucks. They were businessmen, and French businessmen. Now, we had soldiers there from every one of the allied nations. They were there, the British, the Russians, of course the Americans, Australians. We were all there, and we made a conga line all through the streets of Reims. And then all of these people, then we just sat down on the ground on the road and tried to sing everybody's national anthem.
This was 10 o'clock in the morning?
Yeah, yes. I mean, everybody knew this. Somehow the thing had gotten out. It would just, and it was out all over, all at once. Everybody just poured out. It was a magnificent experience to realize that, yeah, for at least a few minutes we were all one. And,
how big a city is Reims?
oh, somewhat smaller than Elmira.
Really?
Yeah. It's a relative. I don't know what it is now, but then it was a relatively small city, and as with a good many cities in France, in Europe, it used to be walls. So you come to a definite end. You're walking along, boom, there's no city. Yeah.
How did that happen to be chosen as the Supreme Headquarters site?
I don't know. I would presume because there were already telephone cables into there, that sort of thing, the communication.
Where was it with respect to the front line into Germany? And
well, first thing, realize that not like World War I, the front lines were very fluid. And we were, during a bulge, we were within cannon shot of the bulge at that time. It was a beautiful champagne area. So after the bulge went, we would make a routine trip, visit one of the champagne makers, and at the end you always got some champagne. So about once a week we'd go here and work our way around. They were very interesting too. Where they aged the champagne were in mines that went back to the Roman era. Yeah, and anyway, so that just that, and it had roads. It was a communication center for northern France. It was probably the biggest area in that part of France.
Near Bordeaux, or?
Oh no! This is up in northern.
Northern.
Okay. Yeah, up near. We went from Versailles north to Reims, and probably distances are different because the countries are small. Probably within 30 or 40 miles at most of their northern border. And then after the Germans surrendered, again I was chosen. I don't know how I'd be so lucky to go to Frankfurt and set up the headquarters there. We stayed Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, until sometime after I left. Then they became still SHAEF, but American Expeditionary Force.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
how big a staff were you on? In
well,
Supreme Headquarters?
There would be 4 shifts because always one shift was off. You did 8 days of work, then you had 2 days off. Was the method in the way the cycles ran in Supreme Headquarters. So there would be 4 with us. For our branch, for the where we processed all of these messages, there would have been in probably about 50 guys, 52 guys that divided into 4 shifts of about 12 each.
And what did these 12 people do? I mean, did everybody do what you did, or?
No, in our heck, the Supreme Headquarters involved at least hundreds of people.
Mm-hmm.
What you can do if you...
But I mean, were you on a team of...
Yeah, just a minute.
Okay.
If you could think of a hotel, you have people who are guests. That would be the generals and the people who ran the war. Then you have the people who are the cooks, who do room assignments, who accept payments, who do maintenance, cleaning. That was the thing we ran SHAEF, but we didn't have any effect on the war.
Mm-hmm.
And I should mention too, in passing, the Germans would come over and bomb on Reims when we were there, but they were only after the railway yards, so we didn't even. The only thing is, the Red Cross Club closed down as soon as there was a signal, so then we had no place to go except back to the barracks, which are crummy. Going back to the type of job here, there was a large crew that worked in the teletype center. There were a whole number of. In fact, I first started as a teletype. Was it like a telephone operator that plugs people into? And they were. The Supreme Headquarters had offices in Marseille, Rome, London, and ultimately in Brussels, and then, as I said, eventually in Frankfurt. So these were all connected by teletype and by radio, and so there was a code room that was. Probably they only had 7 or 8 people per shift in there that decoded and encoded all the messages that needed to be coded, which were just about all of them. And their room, incidentally, was mined. If anything went wrong, the last one out would punch a button and the whole thing would blow up and start a real fire. Let's see, so there'd be that. I had to spoke about my friend who wasn't in my type of job. He did maintenance on all office equipment. Then there was a motor pool. Then there were the guys that ran our outfit. The first sergeant in charge of my company in the 3118 they ran. So there were all, I mean,
Yeah.
there were hundreds of people.
It was like a big business.
Oh, it sure was. In fact, when we went to Frankfurt, we took over the IG Farben building.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really, yeah. And I oftentimes wonder how we managed to do it. Because I remember particularly in Rance, when we were working there, we would, the guys on the day shift would get up and have their breakfast about 7 o'clock in the morning and get over there to relieve the rest of the crew at 8 o'clock. And then the guys on day shift, well, the American Army had the idea of, at 10 o'clock, you had a coffee break. Well, the Supreme Headquarters, while it had all sorts of representatives, was largely British and American. So everybody stopped for the American coffee break. Then the British, at 11 o'clock, had what they called 11s, tea and something. And so everybody stopped for the British having 11s. Then we all stopped for lunch. And then we had a fairly long stretch until about 3 o'clock when the Americans stopped for coffee break. And then 4 o'clock, the British stopped for tea. And then we all went to supper, whoever was on shift. And then in the evening, there was almost a unit. We didn't have the formal breaks in. There was particularly when we got to Frankfurt, there was a nice little place where you could go and get something to eat. So just during the whole evening, we did that. And the WACs were never allowed to work nights. So literally, eventually, the GIs were issued half a bottle, half a fifth of, just by chance, with it whiskey, gin, rum, vodka, or whatever, per month. And so we would everybody would bring in their own share, and we'd set this up in the wax lounge, and if you're on the midnight shift, midnight tea, then you can go in there and have a couple of drinks and a cigarette and then go back to work. On the other hand, I say all this, never did the work slack. Everything was done that should be done and done on time. It was amazing. In other words, you leave people alone who have a commitment, and they'll do it, and we did.
Did the other, the British and the French and the other armed forces have people with the same kind of training that you had, so that you all worked together?
No. The 3118th was an American outfit. We ran the place. The British and French, Russians, and whatnot would be support personnel for their officers who were working with the war. They did not support. They were not in a position as we were to run SHAFE. I should say there was, after the war, there was some feeling that the Russians might decide to take over Europe. And we did not know what the Russian strength was. It was assumed that they were strong. We now know they couldn't have. But it was assumed they were strong enough they could have come right straight through. And it was assumed that they were strong enough that we could not put up any more than a token resistance as we withdrew. And the plans were all there for us who were in Supreme Headquarters to retreat down the Rhine to Bremen, where we would get on boats to take us to England. So this was all set up, and of course they didn't, but we used to, those of us, we'd never been in combat. We had carbines. We're going to even interfere with the Russians. That was silly. We'd be lucky if we lived long enough to bring the carbine to our shoulder. Well, there was another tragic thing. We didn't know this then. We should have been suspicious. Maybe the officers did, but we didn't. And I learned about it afterwards. Russian POWs, who had been captured by the Germans, had a chance thus to really see what life was like in a capitalistic country. And so POWs, the Russians demanded that all of their personnel would be returned. This was theory, the Italians or the rest of them didn't care, though, because if they were returned, they're going to have to put them on on the food rations, whereas if they stayed with the Americans, they'd be fed. And so we would collect a few thousand Russian POWs till we had a train load, and then ship them out. The day of the train load or the night before, I can't remember which, right in there, we would type pages, and I mean this, pages, of names and ID numbers of Russian soldiers who had committed suicide rather than go back. What we didn't know was that these trains went straight across Russia to labor camps in Siberia, and these guys never saw home.
Why did they treat them that way? They were.
Because they had seen what the capitalistic
I see.
world was like.
This was to isolate them.
Yeah, and later on, I didn't know that at that time. All I knew was, I mean, there must be, we knew something terrible was there.
But they knew, the
They
Russian
knew,
soldiers knew.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's take a break and then we'll change this film and then we'll carry on. This is fascinating. Wonderful. Excuse me just a minute.